Okay, so here's the dealio about this video. I was just filming it for like 5 minutes or so. Really not too far in, but I did my spiel. My once of a lifetime spiel, never to be repeated. Never said the same way twice. And also my dogs were out here, so that posed a problem, as it were. But I started off reading the story, and then someone pulls into my driveway, and I had to go interact with them. So I tell you that to tell you this, so that now I'm starting the story fresh. I'm going to be breaking into it much sooner than I did 10 minutes ago when I started recording. But let me tell you, about 10 minutes ago, yeah. So let me tell you something about that I put in this last spiel that I just want to get out there now, too. Okay, so however long it's been since I posted a video last, in between then and now, I had recorded another video. What I did was I read a little 2-page, like a page and a half, basically 2-page part of the novel, my favorite novel currently, Stephen King's It. Now, the little part that I read, it's not really scary. It has to do a lot with the lore behind it, where it came from, when it started, why it is there, a lot of the stuff like that, and also how it interacts with a character in the novel of, this character is just named the Turtle, but the turtle's very minimal in the story of it. No. I should say the turtle's very minimal in the novel It. The turtle is critical to it. A deeper understanding of it. Whatever, that's super goofy. Anyways, we're gonna get into it. There's 4 shout outs that I have to give. I can't remember who I have and haven't done, and eventually there's not gonna be any more shout outs, I'm sure, because they might run out. So anyways, I have to shout out Pickles the Rooster. Big shout out, Pickles, you're famous, you don't even know it. I've got to shout out OG Chicken Boy, my heart goes out to you, just cause. And I also, of course, have to shout out Seeker of Seeker's Aquarium. Check out Seeker's Aquarium on YouTube if you'd like. And a big shout out, can't forget, Pizza Puff. Shout out Pizza Puff. Okay, so now let's get to the reading. It's not super long today. It's a very fun little story. It's by none other than the one, the only. Well, let me find it. It's a story written by Mark Twain. And the story is called What Stumped the Bluejays. What Stumped the Bluejays. The story is in my book I own, 21 Great Stories. And so this book, I think, is super cool. It includes a little bit of kind of like a description, sometimes a little background info to the story, and then it includes background info on the authors for each of the stories that are in this book. But we're not going to read that today. We're just going to go to the story. And here we go. What Stumped the Bluejays? Animals talk to each other, of course. There can be no question about that. But I suppose there are very few people who can understand them. I never knew but one man who could. I knew he could, however, because he told me so himself. He was a middle-aged, simple-hearted miner, like a miner. That's his job, not like a young person. He is a miner, mines for ores. He was a miner who had lived in a lonely corner of California, Being a miner in California makes me think he was mining for gold, which is cool. Among the woods and the mountains he lived for a good many years and had studied the ways of his only neighbors, the beasts and the birds, until he believed he could accurately translate any remark which they made. This man was Jim Baker. According to Jim Baker, some animals have only a limited education and use only very simple words, and scarcely ever a comparison or a flowery figure, whereas certain other animals have a large vocabulary, a fine command of language, and a ready and fluent delivery. Consequently, these latter talk a great deal. They like it. They're conscious of their talent, and they enjoy showing off. Baker said that after long and careful observation, he had come to the conclusion that the Bluejays were the best talkers he had found among birds and beasts. Said he, "There's more to a Bluejay than any other creature. He has got more moods and more different kinds of feelings than other creatures. And mind you, whatever a Bluejay feels, he can put into language. And no mere commonplace language either, but rattling, out and out book talk, and bristling with metaphor too, just bristling. And as for command of language, why, you never see a Bluejay get stuck for a word. No man ever did. They just boil out of him. And another thing, I've noticed a good deal, and there's no bird or cow or anything that uses as good grammar as a Bluejay. You may say a cat uses good grammar. Well, a cat does. But you let a cat get excited once. You let a cat get to pulling fur with another cat on a shed nights, and you'll hear grammar, and that will give you the lockjaw. Ignorant people think it's the noise which fighting cats make that is so aggravating, but it ain't so. It's the sickening grammar they use. Now, I've never heard of a jay use bad grammar, but very seldom. And when they do, they are as ashamed as a human. They shut right down and leave. You may call a jay a bird. Well, so he is in a measure, because he's got feathers on him and don't belong to no church, perhaps. But otherwise, he is just as much a human as you be. And I'll tell you why. A jay's gifts and instincts and feelings and interests cover the whole ground. A jay hasn't got any more principle than a congressman. A jay will lie. A jay will steal. A jay will deceive. A jay will betray. And 4 times out of 5, a jay will go back on his solemnest promise. The sacredness of an obligation is a thing which you can't cram into no Bluejay's head. Now, on top of all this, there's another thing. A jay can outswear any gentleman in the mines. You think a cat can swear? Well, a cat can. But you give a Bluejay a subject that calls for his reserve powers, and where's your cat? Don't talk to me. I know too much about this thing. And there's yet another thing. In the one little particular of scolding, just good, clean, out-and-out scolding, a Bluejay can lay over anything, human or divine. Yes, sir, a jay is everything that a man is. A jay can cry. A jay can laugh. A jay can feel shame. A jay can reason and plan and discuss. A jay likes gossip and scandal. A jay has got a sense of humor. A jay knows when he is a jerk just as well as you do. But better. If a jay ain't human, he better take in his sign, that's all. Now, I'm going to tell you a perfectly true fact about some Bluejays. When I first begun to understand jay language correctly, there was a little incident happened here. 7 years ago, the last man in this region but me moved away. There stands his house. Been empty ever since. A log house with a plank roof. Just one big room. And no more. No ceiling. Nothing. between the rafters and the floor. Well, one Sunday morning, I was sitting out here in front of my cabin with my cat, taking the sun and looking at the blue hills and listening to the leaves rustling so lonely in the trees and thinking of the home way yonder in the States that I hadn't heard from in 13 years. When a blue jay lit on that house, lit as in like landed on that house, with an acorn in his mouth, he says, "Hello, I reckon I've struck something." When he spoke, the acorn dropped out of his mouth and rolled down the roof, of course, but he didn't care. His mind was all on the thing he had struck. It was a knot hole in the roof. He cocked his head to one side, shut one eye, and put the other one to the hole, like a possum looking up down a jug. Like a possum looking down a jug. Then he glanced up with his bright eyes, gave a wink or two with his wings, which signifies gratification, you understand, and says, "It looks like a hole. It's located like a hole. Blamed if I don't believe it is a hole." Then he cocked his head down and took another look. He glances up perfectly joyful. This time winks his wings and his tail both and says, "Oh no, this ain't no fat thing, I reckon. If I ain't in luck, why, it's a perfectly elegant hole." So he flew down and got that acorn and fetched it up and dropped it in, and was just tilting his head back with the heavenliest smile on his face, when all of a sudden he was paralyzed into a listening attitude, and that smile faded gradually off of his countenance like breath off in a razor, and the queerest look of surprise took its place. Then he says, "Why, I didn't hear it fall." He cocked his eye at the hole again and took a long look, raised up and shook his head, stepped around to the other side of the hole and took another look from that side, shook his head again. He studied a while, then he just went into the details. Walked round and round the hole and spied into it from every point of the compass. No use. Now he took a thinking attitude on the comb of the roof and scratched the back of his head with his right foot a minute. I can't do that. And finally says, "Well, it's too many for me. That's certain. Must be a mighty long hole, however. I ain't got no time to fool around here. I got to tend to business. I reckon it's all right. Chance it anyway." So he flew off and fetched another acorn and dropped it in, and tried to flirt his eye to the hole quick enough to see what become of it. But he was too late. He held his eye there as much as a minute. Then he raised up and sighed and says, "Confound it. I don't seem to understand this thing no way. However, I'll tackle her again." He fetched another acorn and done his level best to see what become of it, but he couldn't. He says, "Well, I never struck no such hole as this before. I'm of the opinion it's a totally new kind of hole." Then he begun to get mad. He held in for a spell, walking up and down the comb of the roof and shaking his head and muttering to himself. But his feelings got the upper hand of him presently, and he broke loose and cussed himself black in the face. I never see a bird take on so about a little thing. When he got through, he walks to the hole and looks in again for half a minute. Then he says, "Well, you're a long hole and a deep hole, and a mighty singular hole altogether, but I've started to fill you in, and I'm if I don't fill you," the stutter was in the story. It says, "And I'm if I don't fill you, if it takes 100 years." Wow, I just had a total little space in my thinking called a mind fart. Brain fart. It's supposed to be like, "Oh, and I'll be darned if I don't fill you. If it takes 100 years, he's gonna fill this endless hole." He can't figure out where the acorns are going that he drops. And with that, away he went. You never see a bird work so since he was born. He laid into his work, and the way he hove acorns into that hole for about 2 hours and a half was one of the most exciting and astonishing spectacles I ever struck. He never stopped to take a look anymore. He just hove them in and went for more. Well, at last he could hardly flap his wings. He was so tuckered out. He comes a-drooping down once more, sweating like an ice pitcher, drops his acorn in and says, "Now I guess I've got the bulge on you by this time." So he bent down for a look. If you believe me, when his head come up again, he was just pale with rage. He says, "I've shoveled acorns enough in there to keep the family 30 years. And if I can see a sign of one of them, I wish I may land in a museum with a belly full of sawdust in 2 minutes." So he said, "I put 30 years worth of food in there. Just show me it." And I would give my life just to see where they went. He just had strength enough to crawl up on to the comb and lean his back again, the chimbley again. And then he collected his impressions and begun to free his mind. I see in a second that what I had mistook for profanity in the mines was only just the rudiments, as you may say. Sorry, my nose gets so itchy when I'm making these videos. You probably have noticed if you've been watching. Another jay was going by and heard him doing his devotions and stopped to inquire what was up. The sufferer told him the whole circumstance and says, "Now yonder's the hole, and if you don't believe me, go and look for yourself." So this fellow went and looked and comes back and says, "How many did you say you put in there?" "Not any less than 2 tons, says the sufferer. The other jay went and looked again. He couldn't seem to make it out. So he raised a yell, and 3 more jays came. They all examined the hole. They all made the sufferer tell it over and over again. Then they all discussed it and got off as many leather-headed opinions about it as an average crowd of humans could have done. Thanks, Mark. I like that line, though. They called in more jays, then more and more, till pretty soon this whole region appeared to have a blue flush about it. There must have been 5,000 of them, and such another jawing and disputing and ripping and cussing you ever heard. Every jay in the whole lot put his eye to the hole and delivered a more chuckle-headed opinion about the mystery than the jay that went there before him. They examined the house all over, too. The door was standing half open, and at last one of the old jays happened to go in and light on it and look in. Of course, that knocked the mystery galley west in the second. He flopped his wings and raised a whoop. "Come here," he says. "Come here, everybody. Hanged if this fool hasn't been trying to fill up a house with acorns." They all came a-swooping and took a glance. Skipped a line. They all came a-swooping down like a blue cloud, and as each fellow lit on the door and took a glance, the whole absurdity of the contract that first jay had tackled hit him home, and he fell over backwards, suffocating with laughter, and the next jay took his place and done the same. So when they see what we're about to find out, where these acorns have been going, they land on the door, they see it, they crack up and fall over laughing. "Well, sir, they roosted around here on the housetop in the trees for an hour and guffawed over the things like human beings, that thing like human beings. It ain't no use to tell you a blue jay hasn't got a sense of humor, because I know better. And memory, too. They brought jays here from all over the United States to look down that hole every summer for 3 years. Other birds, too. And they could all see the point, except an owl that come from Nova Scotia to visit the Yosemite. And he took this thing in on his way back. He said he couldn't see anything funny in it. But then he was a good deal disappointed. about Yosemite, too. I'm